We're back with the Teamster View podcast. This is Randy Korgan here. I am going to be joined by two AFGE, which is the union that represents government workers throughout the entire United States. It's a national union that is obviously dramatically affected by these executive orders that are canceling union contracts. And last week, more than 400,000 of them were affected in the United States. That was just that one cancellation of the contracts with the Veterans Affairs Office. I have Maureen Gallagher that's going to be talking here in a few minutes, as well as I'm going to have on Victor, who is from, let me get his name, Victor Alvarado. This is AFGE Local 1206 Steward and Retiree. The retiree is Maureen, and the steward is Victor. Victor will be reconnecting here in a second, and we'll be talking a little bit about how these workers are impacted, number one. Number two, we're also going to talk about what we can do, and I think it's important. This moment that is happening in America right now really needs to be looked at through a lens that is our First Amendment right, our freedom to assemble, our freedom of speech is essentially being stripped away right now. Our rights at work were won beginning in 1934 and 1935, which was the Wagner Act and the National Labor Relations Act, and later on other laws caught up and protected what we call protected concerted activity, which again was won based on the argument of freedom of speech and freedom to assemble. And those arguments they prevailed as a result of many people in Congress at the time explaining that prior to 1934, there was no freedom to assemble. Matter of fact, it was against the law if you assembled at work. And even though the Constitution guarantees two parties can enter into a contract with one another, that for some reason we're now in a place where the Constitution of the United States is violated. Not only the First Amendment, in our opinion, is being stripped away, but also the right to have a contract between two parties. The party being workers represented by the American Federation of Government Employees, which is AFGE, in addition to, and that's obviously hundreds of thousands of workers in that space, which is they're no different than the rest of the public employees. When you dial 911 and a 911 dispatcher picks up the phone and answers, it isn't like a corporation is on the other end asking you if you paid your bill or not, and has to put you on hold for a second to check to make sure that your status is okay. And then they dispatch services in case your house is on fire. Most people don't realize in today's day that is actually how things started many, many, many decades ago, and that you had to pay individual service for police protection, or individual service for fire protection, or individual service for any of these protections. And over the last almost 100 years, communities have demanded more from their government, and that is programs, social programs that protect our community in all of these different spaces. And so now that we see union contracts being canceled, as we saw last week, which infuriated millions of people, in my opinion, across this country. Me specifically, I was immediately on the phone calling, what can we do? Who can we agitate? What do we have to do next? Because, there's two layers to this. And I know I appear to be a little bit all over the place, but I'm going to bring it all back together here in a second. Is we can either sit around and complain and be mad and this stuff happens, or we can do something about it. I'm of the latter. I think we need to do something about it. And part of that is we have a show and we have a platform. And right now we are actually airing live on our Worker Power Radio Network station that we normally play music on. And the reason why we've built out this platform is to deal with exactly what we're talking about right now, is in real time have the ability to report to everybody that's listening in, give them the ability to just tap on a link, be able to listen to this live feed and hear what's going on from real people on the ground that are being impacted by these executive orders or these decisions. And I think it's important to really put this in a context, because many of the people that just lost their collective bargaining rights, again, losing your collective bargaining rights, in our opinion, is no different than stripping away your freedom to speak, your freedom of speech, your freedom of assembly, your protected concerted activity, all rights that were won by workers losing their lives and fighting corporate greed. And here we are in a state where, in a situation, I don't mean state by geographic, I mean that more of, like kind of where we are as a people socially. We're in this space now where it's just wiping away. And so I would like for Victor and Maureen and first introduce themselves and the work that they did or are doing as a AFGE member, as well as what they did working for the VA itself, or any other areas that they may have worked in. Introduce themselves, but also talk about what a slap in the face this is, as far as just having rights stripped away. And I'm gonna take a quote here, and again, I'm giving you guys plenty of stuff to where you can rattle off as soon as you get started. But this stuck out to me, and it just infuriated me that the contract. This is a quote from the VA press secretary, Pete Kasperowitz. Because of this is a huge win for veterans somehow. Somehow this is a win for veterans, okay? And that because of this decision, VA staff will spend more time with veterans. VA facilities can focus on treating veterans instead of hosting unions, and VA can manage its staff according to the veterans' needs, not union demands. There's another comment I gotta pull out here, and I gotta itemize, because this really stuck out to me. The VA, in a news release last week, said eliminating unions would free up workers and funding to serve veterans instead of union bosses. Nationally, 1,900 union representatives spend more than 750,000 hours of taxpayer-funded work in 2024 on bargaining issues, the release said. Let's assume all those statistics are correct. That means there are issues at work that need to be resolved. In other words, there are challenges with management where there's an implementation of things, and or there is value from the workforce to share it on a level in which there's a lot of engagement. Clearly, management can't just entertain this blindly. There has to be some justification for any of this interaction. And second, these aren't union bosses. These are union representatives. In other words, these are representatives mostly made up of their peers. And if they're union bosses, quite frankly, they've been elected by their peers to serve as so-called bosses. And so I want to put a lot of these things in context, because this is clearly an opportunity to villainize the circumstances and situation. And again, the reason why I'm kind of, putting this in front of the dialogue is to give us plenty of meat on the bone for us to kind of really chomp at and talk about, because quite frankly, I believe what Trump is doing, and I think that Trump has issued an act of war on the labor movement, and something needs to be done. Enough's enough. You can't just throw away almost 500,000 people's rights and just say, oh, well, we're trying to be more productive. My emphasis here is on rights that were won. When we're in a space that we just whimsically give away what rights that were won by others who sacrificed, we are really taking advantage of, or we're really taking for granted our moment in time. So again, this is the Teamster Review podcast with Randy Korgan. I have Maureen Gallagher and I have Victor Alvarado on, both from the American Federation of Government Employees. One is a retiree, Maureen. And why don't we have ladies first? Maureen, why don't you introduce yourself? Talk about the job that you did and what you're doing now, and explain why you come on the show. And thank you very much for coming on the show. We really appreciate you reaching out.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you so much for inviting us here. Victor and I both aren't used to doing this TV stuff, so we'll do our best here. But we both worked for at the VA, and I worked at the VA from 2007 to 2020. I was a social worker. I worked with homeless vets a lot of that time. And I also volunteered with our union to help our members understand. So as you were talking about our contract, it's not just any contract. It's a contract. We have VA facilities in every state in the country, and the Philippines, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and so the contract is negotiated with the negotiating team of the VA, and then it's signed by both the VA authorities and our union leadership. And then it is sent to Congress and it is ratified by Congress. So this is literally taking a contract that was ratified by Congress and throwing it in the garbage. Like, oh yeah, we're going to just totally disregard this. And that was our contract was um, signed in 2023 after hard negotiations, and it's going to be up in 2026. So this is, it's just so frustrating that laws that we have in our country are just being disregarded, and anything that Trump wants to write as an executive order over supersedes all the laws. And he did this in the last administration, and we went to court and we won all the cases. And we are in court again with all of these issues. And we'll win again because the law is on our side. But it takes time for things to go through the courts, and meanwhile our members are suffering and the veterans are suffering. And actually, in federal service, a third of federal employees are veterans themselves. So this is really endangering, the mental health of our employees. And I mean, everybody, and Victor will speak to this, how just scared people are. I mean, people get federal jobs because they want to work at something that's stable, that they can support their families with, that they can work and provide services to veterans. I mean, the level of loyalty of our employees is, I think it's exceptional, because people are so dedicated to working with veterans.
And they weren't.
So
That
I
loyalty was not reciprocated here last week, was it?
not kidding. Yeah, and I mean, the reality is, if you have, the VA is a medical system. We don't have a medical provider in this country as large as the VA system. So we are the biggest medical system that we provide medical services across the whole country to veterans. And it's very complex. I mean, any of us who have been to any hospital anywhere for anything know that things happen in hospitals, and they're very complex systems to run. And we're no different than that. And the VA, the union ends up trying to help veterans get the best care. I mean, that's always like spoken at our union meetings, constantly. That it's not just, it is, of course, union representation is our most important thing, but our union at the VA is very tied to people's dedication to caring for our veterans.
Thanks, Maureen. Let's hear from Victor for a minute. Victor, can you introduce yourself to all of the listeners, as well as explain what job you do or did working for the VA?
Thank you. First, let me begin by thanking both of you for the opportunity to get the word out and really educate a lot of folks that just don't know the truth. And I think that's the bottom line with any news. We want to get to the truth. First, my name is Victor Alvarado, and I am a medical advanced assistant, support assistant. And what I do technically is support the doctors and nurses and what they call PAC teams. What many people may not understand is that when a veteran goes into a medical clinic, they are not just seeing a doctor, they are seeing a team. And each team consists of, headed by the physician, but they'll have a nurse, they'll have a licensed vocational nurse, they'll have a social worker, they'll have an administrative assistant. There's a host of other folks, including pharmacists and pharmacies, that develop a team. And so that veteran is getting comprehensive health with just one team. And they work hand in hand with other teams for specialties such as cardiology, podiatry, and other specialties in the medical industry. So I first want everybody to know that they're getting exceptional care. And my firsthand experience is that they're getting care from folks that are former veterans themselves. Many of the physicians and the people on the team are former veterans. So you find a whole host of people that are dedicated. And I originally came from the corporate world, spent many years in the banking industry, and over 25 years in the banking industry. And I came to the VA because I wanted to give back, and that was something that I wasn't doing in the corporate world. And so you'll find a lot of people in the industry that are there for the right reasons. Like any other business, and let's not forget that this is a business. This is the business of taking care of people. And so we want to be clear, there's good people and there's bad people. There's things that can be improved. There's things that need to be improved. But the overall care and the attitude of the people that are serving the veterans, I think, is exceptional, not just in the Northern California, but nationwide. And you'll find a lot of loyal, dedicated workers. What I did with the union was I was a union steward, which means I represented the interest of the employees when they had issues with management. And just like any business, you have managers that want to follow the rules and you have others that disregard it. And what's unfortunate is that my opinion is that at the very top, we have a leader that just wants to disregard the rules. And so because of that, what we're having now is a lot of fear. And that's because people are scared of the unknown. And when you're scared of the unknown, you don't know what to expect. You join the federal government, and many of these that have a military background have a really strong hold on what it means to have chain of command. They understand that there are rules, and they're willing to follow the rules. And right now, there seems to be no rules. It's whatever we want to make up. And in my opinion, the attitude is we're going to do what we want to do, see you in court. And that strategy, they know, takes a lot of time. And by the time it gets corrected, the damage is done. And so that's what I see happening now. A lot of people are fearful. There were many cases that we were working on that were in the works that have just been kicked to the side. And so now I see supervisors feeling empowered to do whatever it is they want to do in a manner in which they want to do it. And so that's unfortunate, and I'm glad we're here to bring that to light.
Yeah, let me just give you a quick programming update. I just got notified that KCAA, which is a local radio station, has picked this live feed up right now and is actually sharing it live over 106.5 and 106.5 FM and 1050 AM. And so we appreciate KCAA jumping in, grabbing the live feed, and actually running over their normal programming for you to this is how important it is. In other words, they want everybody to hear this story too. In other words, all the listeners in the area that are within the ability to listen to the FM and AM bands, in addition to where we stream. So thank you, KCAA, for picking this up and actually running it live as we're just recording a podcast and putting it on our actual stream that we send out. So just as an update for you, that's how important this is. Thank you so much for coming on. And let me ask a few questions. Really appreciate you laying some of this out. As a social worker or as a medical advanced assistant, you're obviously doing really important work. Like, it is not like you're just sitting around, like, shuffling paper around, right? Like, a social worker is sometimes makes or break people in their ability to find, services, sometimes mental health, a combination of, physical and mental health. Sometimes it's, you're not sure, they're not sure who, what they need. And you're walking people and connecting them to the services in which they're going to need, that they may not be aware of until they make contact with you. And these services are extremely important, and having value in your workplace where you have the ability to share that through a union contract and make sure that the employer, because as you pointed out, Maureen, that the VA is the largest essential medical institution in the entire country. And so with it being a big institution, it needs the voice of the people, the voice of the workforce, the voice of the individuals doing the job every single day heard, and not just heard on a surface level, but heard in a situation where they're required to listen because there's collective bargaining in place. That is the only place that you can truly have an efficient workplace, because if workers are working in fear, they're less likely to bring up issues because they're concerned that the boss is going to retaliate as a result of the issues that were brought up, because it could be the way the place is being managed, or the manager just takes it wrong and ultimately reacts the wrong way to those that are performing the job. So my point to bringing it all up is we value your work. Teamsters 1932, those that listen to the Worker Power Hour, those that listen to the Teamster View podcast, we appreciate your work. We value your work, and we really appreciate you coming on, because our local represents thousands of public employees, and they could very quickly be in this same boat. And it's clear, this is a clear message, that this is a power grab to run over unions and to try to villainize unions and not prop them up in a way that to point out what their true value to the community is, at making sure that the worker has a voice. And let me just reiterate what I said in the beginning. Like, the First Amendment, the freedom of speech and the freedom to assemble, has just been stripped away by taking away a union contract. And you're right. You're going to go into court as you've prevailed before. And if you prevailed before, and here we are again, it shows this disdain, right? This corporations and the corporate attitude in America is controlling, for the most part, America. Because, quite frankly, if it's up to them, they'll privatize everything at the VA, put that into a system that's for profit, for someone to make billions of dollars off down the road. And so, again, we appreciate you coming on, and we really appreciate your input and the work that you did. Couple questions for you. Like, I'll tell you, I'm super aggressive in this space. And when it's happened to AFGE regarding TSA, and TSA lost their bargaining rights, my position was, hey, then no one should go to work. Like, guess what? You're not going to be able to have screeners at the airport. You're going to take away our collective bargaining rights. Then we're not going to show up for work. When Utah eliminated collective bargaining rights through the legislature, through for public employees, and eliminated bargaining rights for public employees in Utah, public employees should have not shown up for work that following Monday. Should have put them on notice, said you got till Monday. Cops, firefighters, everybody that does all the great work out there in the community, we're not going to work. 10% of the population, over 10% of the population in Utah signed petitions to get that on the ballot and override what the governor signed. That tells you 10% of the population of Utah signed petitions. That's a massive number, right? And so clearly the community wants these jobs, especially when you explain to them the impact. They're not the villains in which they're being said. But I think we're going to have to take this to another level. I think we're going to have to say, hey, it's time that we just withhold their labor until they stop with this foolery, until they stop playing the game, and just draw the line in the sand and say, we're not going to work until you fix it. You don't have to answer that right now. I'll come back to it. But let me go back to you, Victor. What do you think of being that assertive in this moment?
I think that we have to be strategic in how we approach it. We have to understand that as federal employees, we're limited into what we can do as far as demonstrations. We are not allowed to strike, which is a big factor, and listeners really need to know that federal employees cannot walk off the job. They cannot strike. If they do, there's ramifications, not only including losing their job, but there could be other ramifications that could affect them. So um, it's limited to what they can do aggressively. And I think that's known by the administration, and it's one of the reasons that they've taken the strategy that they have, because they know that the employees can't walk off the job. So that's one thing. But it's great to have your support and support of other unions, because we may not be able to walk off the job, but I'm sure strategically there's things that we can do so that they can hear our voice and they can feel the pain that we're feeling. So that's the important part, is that we just be strategic in how we approach it.
Something, Maureen, something I heard Victor say a minute ago was fear. In other words, that there's a lot of people that are fearful of how management is starting to going to lean in, or they have to be careful of how they approach this moment because they're fearful. And look, I think
Right,
that
because Musk already came in and fired a whole bunch of people, and a lot of those people were reinstated because they lost the court case. But it's very real. It's it's not even a threat. It's that it's already begun to happen, and so people have no idea what kind of security they have in their
which,
jobs.
which is why we got to conquer that fear now. Because Victor, I absolutely respect legally what the position is and what we're supposed to do, but it seems like the other side isn't following the rules. So why are we? Quite frankly, every law in this country to protect workers was won by somebody else withholding their labor, by workers going on strike and withholding their labor. That is why public employees even gained the right. Private sector workers withheld their labor enough in this country to then get that passed for public employees in 1964 and 1965. The reality is maybe we got to lean back into that space, because quite frankly, agreeing to a peace treaty with the government or with certain individuals that doesn't allow us to withhold our labor, but you have the ability to just wipe away our collective bargaining. So if you're going to break the rules, then guess what? So are we.
And I don't know exactly where that's going to go. I mean, my ex-husband, who I was with for 25 years, was a Teamster. And I know he went on strike like 4 times. And that's a very different way of living than federal employees live. But um, I think I totally agree with you that we have to think outside the box. I mean, kind of like what Newsom is doing, what Senator Chris Murphy is doing in Connecticut, like, and in Texas, right? With gerrymandering. Oh, you're gonna suddenly make all new rules about setting voting districts, and so we usually do that every 10 years after the
Census.
thank you, census. And so suddenly they're like, no, we're going to do it now. So, that's what our governor just said. Oh, okay, well, then we'll do it, which California has a lot of influence in this country. And I was happy that he stood up and used his power in that way. So we, we are creative in the ways that we protest what happens with the federal government, and we lean on the ears of our Congress people and our senators. We have regular meetings with them. People do that. Our employees do that all over the country, on our legislative teams, and let our Congress people know what bills are helping us, which ones, they use some great words with bills, but they're about cutting people's heads off and cutting off their livelihood. And so we are always trying to help our Congress and senators understand how these bills are going to affect our employees and all the veterans at the VA.
But
So I agree with you. And the thing is, from my experience, that federal employees, from the minute that go in for an interview and go in there. I've gone to anti-war demonstrations my whole life. Okay, so I have used to being at protests, and But at the VA and in federal jobs, you walk in and you sign on a piece of paper that, they can look at anything in your life and you're going to follow the rules. So it is an institution that regulations and laws are just a part of everyday life at the VA. Right, Victor? And
And, that,
and they're
and
moving
that's
targets.
the issue. That's the issue that we're in right now because there are rules. And our host made a point earlier in the conversation about how when he read off the statistic about how much money supposedly was spent on union and union issues. Well, the truth of the matter is, and I want the listeners to really understand this, if there were no issues, there'd be no need for the union.
That's correct. And there
So,
wouldn't have been all those hours piled up,
exactly.
right?
I
That's
mean, they're
right.
not just twiddling their thumbs. This is a active war against management in situations where they choose not to follow the rules. And we can easily show them, here are the rules. Look at what you're doing. Let an arbitrator, and I am a certified mediator, I can show, here is the facts. They lay where they are. They're black and white. The I should say the VA hasn't been around for a day. There isn't a situation that they haven't faced in the last 100 years. So there's nothing new. We're not making up anything. We're not creating anything new. We're enforcing, as you said, what people have fought for years to achieve. And now we're only asking you to follow the rules. And now you're going to say, there are no rules. We're going to do what I say.
Yeah, and that's my point is that for them, for those that are making the decisions right now in the administration, they are taking a position that they don't need to follow the rules, yet they require everybody that works for them to follow the rules.
Right.
Like, I'm sorry, that's where power comes. In other words, once workers say, no. We're now going to withhold our labor until you start following the rules. I know you're claiming that we're breaking the rules, but we didn't start this fight. You did. And you're right. Everybody that's been hired there, obviously they were screened and they went through an interview process and they were explained, here's what you have to comply with. And part of it's been that a whole bunch of people that were hired based on conditions to make sure that you did comply to the rules and you do follow the rules like you just laid out. However, that same loyalty, that same commitment is not being shared by the employer at this particular moment. As a matter of fact, it's now gone that far. The only thing they haven't done is fire all of you. That's it. That's the next thing. And people say, well, I'm afraid of doing this. Well, that is the next step. Maybe don't fire all of you in mass, but there's definitely a piecemealing coming.
Yeah, and that's been part of their plan. The Heritage Foundation, wrote the Project 2025, and they have wanted to privatize the VA for years and have chiseled away at different systems. We have a whole community care program where people get sent out for treatment in the community. And sometimes that's really important because people live in rural areas and they can't come into the VA, whatever. But it undermines. So now the budgets for community care are cutting into the basic VA budgets. And so what the plan has always been that these people have had is, okay, we're going to weaken the VA so it starts falling apart. We're going to fire people so they're understaffed, which we always have that problem anyway. And then we're going to say, oh, look, the VA doesn't work, so we have to privatize this.
Let's
And
unpack this for a minute. Like, let's look at healthcare over the last few decades where there's been a deregulation of a number of parts of, let's say, hospitals, the healthcare industry, and you can have this kind of for-profit sort of setting, and some of them don't call it profit, but we can see what United Healthcare and many of them are doing is they're making a ton of money in the healthcare space, and then they're putting that money over to have it invested in in the market, also in private equity firms, and they're making billions of dollars on the money they made out of the healthcare system. And so we already have an example of privatizing healthcare and it not working very well.
It
People
works well
today
for the people who collect the money at the top, but it doesn't help any of us who need the health care.
and
It
access
doesn't
to
help
that's
people.
correct, and access to care is the worst it's been in decades for people in the private sector when it comes to healthcare. For them to be able to get the services that they need, it is obviously extremely challenged because of exactly what we're talking about. And so it's ironic to hear this criticism. Anytime I hear the criticism, I understand that you can always make anything more efficient, whether it's public sector or private sector. So you have to sit people down, get the individuals that are invested in it do the work to help create the input into making those jobs more efficient and effective. Not when you eliminate their union and their collective bargaining, that actually takes away the ability to be more effective and efficient, regardless of any narrative that's being spit out by the institutions right now. What are your thoughts on that, Victor?
Well, I think you hit it right on the head. There's a lot of misinformation out there. They want to give the narrative that federal workers are lazy, that they don't work hard, that they're not accomplishing the goals. But statistically, that's just not true. And it seems to be the narrative in a lot of different situations from this administration. But when you do the fact finding, the facts don't bear the words. And so it's important that if you are out there and you're listening to this, that you go ahead and find the facts for yourself. Don't listen to an employee like myself or a podcast, but go on there and do some research. And you'll find that it's just not true. And talk to your family and friends that are getting care from the VA. I'm sure that everybody on this podcast knows somebody who's a veteran. And there are very few. I mean, you'll always hear veterans complain about something, but that's no different than the private industry. There's always going to be somebody complaining about something. But when you look at the amount of people that we process and that we help on a daily basis, it's impossible not to get an overwhelming amount of veterans that come through the clinics now offering their support. Just like you, what can I do? Who can I say? Who do I need to write? What do I have to do? It'd be a shame if you wasn't here anymore. These folks develop a relationship just like you do with any healthcare provider. They know who you are. They know your families. They know your tendencies. And this is important to understand. This is a relationship business. Healthcare is about relationships. It's not just, prescribing medications and sending people back home. And so a lot of these doctors, have a relationship for years. I know some of these physicians that, can tell me that they took care of their dads and their dad's dad and their granddad. Some of these physicians have been here for decades. Similar to my brother who taught 30 years as a teacher and's got, I'm teaching your grandfather. That's the same thing in the medical industry. And so I want listeners to make this a personal thing, not just a statistical thing. You have to really personalize this and understand that there are millions of people that are being affected, both employees and patients.
And you made a great point. In other words, go out and research it yourself. I would just make one adjustment. It's, listen to this information, but also
Right.
go out and verify, right? Make
Right.
sure that the things that we're saying are accurate and true. Maureen, I have a question for you. As a social worker, you're obviously a retiree now, and congratulations. I always appreciate retirees staying active because that means that you're going to bring value to what you're doing in a way that you've kind of been there, done that, but now you still want to give back. Anyway, the point is as a social worker, if you were a social worker now, how do you think collective bargaining being eliminated affects your ability to do the job if you were a social worker right now? How do you think this impacts social workers right now on the ground by this decision?
Well, I think that one of the biggest things that unions have brought to this country is that it's expanded democracy. So I'm a freer person. When I have a voice in the process, I am a freer person and I'm able to feel better about my work. I mean, unfortunately, it has not always gone my own way. I tried to convince them, but it's part of our democracy. It makes the whole decision making become more of a collaborative experiment, you know,
You know,
that
I gotta hand it to you. I love that, Maureen. Like that is great phrase. Like unions expand democracy, and it's so true because as a grievance person in your area, I'm not sure what all the titles are for all of you, but you typically got to be elected to those chair positions or elected by your peers. You have to have the respect of your peers in this space to represent them on subjects. Clearly, if you're a union leader and elected on an executive board or in any position where you're authorizing funds, you're in an elected position. Democracy decided who is in that place, and now all of the people that work for the VA don't have anybody democratically elected representing them in their best interest. That is somebody else that's been appointed. That's been this person's going to be in charge, and they say this is how it goes. What a great way to put it. You are absolutely right. It is
yeah, and it's
expanded
taking our
democracy.
democracy and our voices away from us, and the ways that work is such a central thing for us, right? I mean, Victor, some of us, we just work, right? That's what we do, and you know, we need to have a voice in our work and how things go. Um, a couple of my fellow retirees, we just got together yesterday and we were talking about how we had a meeting and everybody, all of our supervisors were busy in other places, and so we like sort of redesigned our department. None of them were there, but it made it function better and it made all of us feel like we had some power in the process. And I think that that's what unions do. They make, you know, they have to sit at the table with you. They have to negotiate the terms and conditions of employment. That is what the union does, and it affects everybody across the board. And you know, a lot of people don't take the time to read our master agreement or understand all that, but it affects them every day. It affects. That's how the Teamsters were an early union that created weekends and pensions. You know, it's like none of that would be part of our lives, which a lot of people take that for granted now, but it's part of our lives because people have fought to put that level of democracy into the whole work world, which the corporate world, they're totally happy with having an authoritarian head at the top, waving their fingers, telling everybody, do this, you know. But this is, and I have friends. I just traveled this year and talked to somebody in Australia, and he said, "How come people don't vote? Not that many people vote in the United States." And I'm like, "I know, it's embarrassing." And so I said, "Well, how do you get people to vote in Australia?" And he said, "Oh, it's a law. You have to vote." And I said, "How do you enforce that?" And he said, "Oh, you get fined. Just like if I park my car in the wrong place in the city, I get a ticket. And if I don't pay it, it goes on my credit report, or, you know, I get it in my taxes." So I was like,
You
wow,
know,
we
you
should
learn
do that
something
here.
new every day. And
I
and
know.
today I'm assuming a lot of people just learned for the first time how they get people to vote in Australia, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, I imagine
Oh,
in America some people would freak out about that, and quite frankly, as part of our democracy, it's a situation where there are many that want to suppress certain groups, certain cultures, certain economic
but
the
they don't
diversity.
want they don't want to be suppressed themselves. They want other people to be suppressed.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Victor, what do you got to say about that?
No, I'm just sitting here and enjoying listening to these points because I want people to really understand that this is something that we need to be active. We need to get involved. And um, it's important. It's important because ultimately it's not just the VA, it's the federal government. And there are other institutions within the federal government that are going to face the same demise. And so that's the most important thing to me is that people understand this is not just the VA. And these rights, they apply to everybody.
Well, and I'll take this a step further. in Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, no state shall pass any law impairing the obligations of a contract. And the reason for that that's in our Constitution is to allow parties to engage in a contract with one another. And so here we have a contract that wasn't just two people, it was two institutions, it was the government, including Congress, who ultimately approved something that is now canceled by one person. Like,
And what I find
holy smokes.
I find it just I can't understand why Congress isn't making more noise. I mean, if I had a contract that I negotiated and someone took it away, I'd be screaming and yelling. And I don't understand why folks that are in Congress are not making more noise about this.
If enough people walked off the job, I think Congress would be freaking out, wouldn't they?
Without a doubt.
I'm gonna keep leaning into
Without a
that,
doubt.
right?
Right.
And look, I'm not trying to get you to commit to something. I understand that you've been part of a system that you've been told you can't strike. It's against the rules. You've been playing by the rules this entire time, while
Right.
others are not. I think this is a time where we start to say, collective bargaining was gained by us withdrawing our labor, withholding our labor, by saying, hey, commerce, you are not going to profit while we figure this out. Because if you remember, as I pointed out earlier, it was against the law for workers to strike prior to 1934. I find it ironic that here we are in 2025, that workers feel like, well, it's against the law for me to strike, even though it's also against the law for them to relinquish my contract, to cancel my bargaining.
Violate it, yes.
Right. So at a certain point, what gained the rule, what gained the law, was workers said, we are withholding our labor until we work this out. Please value it. And most of the time, those workers didn't overreach. Most of the time, if you look back in history, most disputes that happened were the workers, 9 times out of 10, 99 out of 100, were in the right space when they were withholding their labor. It was typically, they were fighting for something pretty darn important in those moments. There are some that there were overreaches, but those are very infrequent. And so, again, I'm not trying to get you to commit to something. I'm just trying to pound this message, because I think what we have to do in this country is we got to educate. You said it earlier, Victor. I think it was you that said we got to go out and educate workers, and people have got to understand the true facts of what's going on right now. And what the other thing we have to do is we got to educate workers on their right to withhold their labor. And so let's assume you all play by the rules. Well, there's still millions of workers that do have the right to withhold their labor. And if they withhold their labor and say, look, it's time corporate America starts to be responsible. It's time that the government does A, B, or C. It's time that this institution does 1, 2, or 3. We've got to get back into that space where every single American understands they have the right to withhold their labor at some point in this process.
And it's important to know, because a bulletin came out from the government saying specifically that all grievances and arbitration shall immediately cease. Employees are not covered by the FSL-MRS. They're to be processed by LMR, which is simply internal VA administration. And then they're saying that bargaining shall immediately cease. And it's important that cases that were actively going on where employees were being mistreated have now just been told, you know what? It doesn't matter. And managers, supervisors are feeling empowered to continue to mistreat because they know there's no ramification now. So that's where I want folks to educate themselves, because it's your family and friends that are being abused.
Yeah, and just a programming update here so that you know, we're getting live feedback. I'm getting live feedback on some of our platforms, as well as getting text messages, people listening in, saying the conversation's great, they're learning something right now. So just so you know, people are hearing you. And also, we'll take this podcast, give it to you, and you can share it with whomever you want, post it wherever you want, and obviously encourage people to listen to the Worker Power Hour and or tune into the Teamster View podcast after the fact. Again, just a programming update as a reminder, because we don't have commercials, right? You notice I've
Right.
not broken for a commercial, because what we've done is we've built these platforms so that we can communicate in mass, so that we have the ability when these moments come to get the word out and to educate. And I do challenge somebody. You think I'm wrong and I'm off base? If I got 2 other seats in here, 3 seats in here, come in here and explain. Let's have a debate here in front of everybody, and we'll figure out. We'll let people decide after they hear both sides of the argument. My point is it's important for us to try to get the word out, educate, give specifics. Like I just referenced the part of the Constitution. Somebody wants to tell me, oh, it's not meant to protect union contracts. Well, why not? Let's have that debate, right? It's not meant for this.
Oh
It's
yeah,
not
we're
meant for
not
that.
citizens, right? Is that
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. So let part of education is to stir up a little bit of debate on the subject, right? So
And there's folks out there that want to know specifics. So let me just update you on some of the legislation that's going on. March 27th was the day that the executive order 14251 was issued. And that night, Trump administration sued multiple AFG affiliates in Waco, Texas, seeking declaration judgments that it can be to terminate the CBAs. So that's where they started to make noise about getting rid of the CBAs. That lawsuit was later dismissed in July 23rd. On April 3rd, AFGE filed lawsuits challenging that executive order. On June 24th, preliminary injunctions issued preserving status quo. So the courts have been, in our favor, and the administration simply says, you know what, so what? Um, June 24th, or I should say July 1st, government seeks emergency stay of pending appeal. And they're picking the courts and the towns where they want to do this, where they know they're going to get the most support. Um, so it's not something that's being done, nationwide where everybody has a voice. They're limiting where these cases are being heard. August 1st, the North Circuit grants stay of the pending appeal. AFGE continues to oppose government appeals in the Ninth Circuit, and AFGE continues to move forward with litigation in district court. So it's really a battle of the courts. But I also want to say, in my opinion, it looks like like any lawsuit, it's a battle of resources, and the government has unlimited resources only because they're using the people's money. If they were fighting with their own money, I don't think we would have aggressive uh, challenges as we do now, because it's not costing them anything. It's costing the taxpayer, not the people that are actually trying to get their will.
Victor, thank you for laying out that timeline. Very good, accurate explanation of how all of this has unfolded in the last 6 months, and each of the pieces that have gone into play that have obviously impacted your bargaining and your ability to be represented. Maureen, you got anything you want to close on? We just got a few minutes here in this
So,
segment.
yeah, so one thing I would like to encourage everyone who's listening, what you can do to help us is please call your congressperson. If you don't have the number to call your congressperson, just Google contact my congressperson, and it'll ask you for your zip code. You put in your zip code and it'll tell you exactly who your congressperson is. Please call them, write them an email, send them a text, and let them know that you're upset about this and that they should be pushing back. They should be pushing the president on this. So we ask you to do that. Also, we will be having some demonstrations outside of the VAs. And you know, veterans love the VA because it is specifically for veterans. Like when they go to a doctor's appointment, they walk into a waiting room and there's 4 or 6 other veterans there. They may never have met them before, but they suddenly have people they can talk to, because it's like, oh yeah, I was in the army, I was in the navy, and so then a whole discussion goes on, and that happens all the time. And veterans suffer so much from PTSD, and they get very isolated socially. And so being able to come to the VA, to be part of mental health groups, to be able to come and be in a group with veterans, they say it all the time. They say it all the time. We feel more comfortable here. We're among our own here. And it becomes a place of healing for them, both physically and with their mental health. So I encourage all veterans, please call your Congress people and let them know that you will not take this line down. You will not let them strip away your VA. Thank you.
Victor, over to you.
And that was to all of my members in local 1206. Please do this. And any other union person listening, thank you so much. We have to just hang together. Thank you.
Victor.
I want to close by saying, personally, I'm a man of faith, and I believe that the right will always win. And I believe that we stand in the right here with our rights have already been negotiated. I believe that legally we stand in the right. And so I'm faithful and I'm hopeful that it's all going to work out in our favor. But in the meantime, faith without works is dead. And so we need to be doing some work. And I think Maureen laid out some things that we can do by calling our Congress people. I think that actually going into and visiting, especially for those veterans out there that are not accessing their benefits, there are things like Stand Down, which is happening in Northern California the next the weekend, the 14th, 15th, and 16th, a place where they can go and get information about resources. People need to know that they have rights and they need to know that they have resources. And the Veterans uh, Administration does an awesome job. And we could talk about all the ills, but I think we should focus on the positives. There's so many things that even the administration, the supervisors, we're all here to serve the veterans. And I think if we stay focused on that, ultimately everybody wins.
Well, Victor, Maureen, really appreciate you coming on. We're actually gonna close this segment up, and then I'm gonna close the end of the show here. Really appreciate your work. We appreciate
Much.
what you've
Thank
done
you,
all
Randy.
these
Thank you for
years
having
in
us.
serving the veterans there and taking care of them. We appreciate that here at Teamsters 1932 and the Worker Power Hour, as well as the Teamster View podcast. And our members appreciate you as a whole, and the community absolutely appreciates you. Even though right now there's a few people that are not reciprocating that appreciation right now, and we're going to make sure that it's squared up. So we appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much. Thanks for being on the Teams Review podcast.
Thanks for
Thank
inviting
you.
us. Appreciate it.
And all of you that are listening in, man, what a powerful story. You're hearing it directly from those individuals that do the job and that are impacted by this decision that clearly completely wipes away workers' rights. Yeah, I need you to close that out, Mark. This is a moment in time that we really have to pay attention to what we do next, how we engage, who we're educating, who we're asking to do an action, get involved in the movement, learn something about what's going on, making sure that we're holding individuals accountable, whether it's calling our Congress people, calling our senators, engaging individuals directly, canvassing, knocking on doors, making sure that we vote and making sure we understand the consequences of our vote. And a point that I didn't make while Maureen and Victor were on the call is after the VA decision was made, thousands of workers at FEMA had the same thing happen. Thousands more at the EPA had it happen again over the last few days. So someone's just going down the list and saying, you don't have the right to bargain. You don't have the right to bargain. Calling everybody a bunch of bureaucrats, that they're wasting money, that these people don't earn their paychecks, that these services are not necessary. And what we found after the fact is that most people don't realize these services until they need them, and those that are actually in need of these services right now there's a recognition that they're going to have to bring people back, and they're going to have to fix a lot of these decisions that have been made. And so how do we prevent this going forward? We have to build worker power. We have to get engaged. We have to participate. We have to exercise our right to withhold our labor. We have to be more assertive, and I appreciate that Maureen and Victor they're trying to be loyal to the rules in which they got hired under. But there's a breaking point coming, and at some point we're just going to have to withhold our labor. We're going to have to withhold it on a massive scale, and we're going to have to do it in a way that corporate America just stops this game, or at least minimizes it to this point. Thank you for joining us. We've been live on the Worker Power Radio Network. For those of you that jumped on, listened in, thank you. Please share this podcast when we send it out here pretty soon with others to hear and listen from those that are directly affected by some of these decisions. And we're going to have to make sure that this doesn't happen to you too in your neighborhood. Thank you. This is Randy Korgan signing off, the Teamster View Podcast.